During the Second World War, there were many executions carried out by different armies and forces. The Germans rampaged throughout different lands in Europe and brutally struck fear into the hearts of the populations once under occupation by ordering large-scale executions and killings of civilians. Czechoslovakia was occupied, and in 1939 Hitler announced a protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, which left the country powerless to German invasion. It was considered the arsenal of the Reich, as the land would produce huge amounts of weapons used by the German army, including 500 tanks and billions of rounds of ammunition. Brought in to strike terror into the Czechs was Reinhard Heydrich, who instigated a regime that was so violent to keep the country productive for the German war effort. But quickly in the land, the Gestapo, SS and other feared Nazi organisations operated. There was one woman who was executed in September 1946 for collaborating with the Gestapo and for brutally ordering executions of Czech civilians. Join us today as we look at the execution of Herta Kasparova, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Herta Kasparova was born on the 21st of June 1923 in Trest, and her father was a worker on the railway. But from birth, Herta had a deformity with her legs, and she walked with a limp of her right leg. She attended school but was bullied and called names because of this deformity, but her family spoke Czech and also German. Because of this, her family was seen as opportunistic, especially with regards to the politics of the 1930s, as Hitler seized control of the Sudetenland following the Munich Agreement. The family then moved to the German Empire, but following the establishment of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, Herta gained Reich citizenship because of her German origins. So with this she was dual nationality, Czech, and also she was now part of the Nazi Empire. She allegedly even changed her surname to Kaspar to sound more German, to distance herself from her Czech links. As her brother was well connected, Herta Kasparova in 1940 began a new job, and she worked at the office of the German criminal police in Jihlava as a recorder and also as an interpreter. She worked for the Gestapo, and as she had a fluent command of German and also Czech, she willingly took part in interrogations of Czech Resistance fighters, and many of the answers that they gave led to them being sentenced to death and later executed. So Herta's work in the interrogations led to the deaths of a number of Czech citizens and civilians. Those who worked with the Gestapo and other elements of the German occupation were often looked down on with disgust in lands such as Czechoslovakia. She continued to work with the Gestapo, and as more soldiers were captured, she was given more work translating. She also worked on documents and reported on other possible dissenters or resistors in her town. But as the war turned against the Germans and the Red Army were advancing towards the lands, she left her job quickly and then returned to live with her parents in Trest in spring 1945. Following the outbreak of the Prague Uprising and the news of liberation of certain areas of Czechoslovakia, resistance developed in Trest too against the German occupiers. On the 7th of May 1945, insurgents took control of the city and formed the National Committee. As part of revenge against the German population, a group of 20 armed men broke into the Kasparova apartment and looted it, and also demolished it. All of the German residents of the town were rounded up and imprisoned in the town hall, and a number were lynched and hanged in public, and were beaten and subject to physical violence and attacks. The uprising in Trest was reported in other lands, still under Nazi occupation, and 2 Wehrmacht units arrived to free the imprisoned German population. Herta Kasparova noticed a number in the group of imprisoned people through her job, and she was later asked to identify the men and boys who had broken into her home and stolen items. She chose 11 people, and from these, all of those 11 people Herta claimed had broken into her house were executed by a firing squad in the courtyard of the town hall, along with other captured rebels. It's believed that a number of these men executed could have even been those who bullied her at school, and that Herta was enacting her own personal revenge against those. She was freed by the Germans from her brief imprisonment along with the town's other Germans, and she fled to Austria, where she worked as a servant and a laundress and also a cook. She even worked in the kitchens for the Red Army who had arrived, but on the 2nd of February 1946, she was recognised and then taken back to Czechoslovakia. In September 1946, a number of trials of war criminals and collaborators took place in the lands, and Herta was placed on trial for her work alongside the Gestapo and alongside the German units who executed the men at her command. She claimed at her trial that, "I know that I caused the death of several people. I acted out of revenge." She defended herself and did claim that she didn't know the men would be executed, but the court did not hesitate. They sentenced Herta Kasparova to death for collaborating with the Nazis and for crimes against the Czech people. She was to be executed by hanging in public, and she asked for an extension of 3 hours so she could meet her brother, and the court allowed this brief reprieve. On the day that she was sentenced to death, Herta Kasparova was also executed that evening. She was brought to a meadow outside of Trest near to the town's castle. The day before, the head of the Nazi Party officers in the town was executed there in the same way. She was brought to the site of her execution, and a large crowd had gathered. She was executed using a pole hanging, which was common in Czechoslovakia, and the device measured 3 meters in length, 60 centimeters in width, and 5 centimeters in thickness. When Herta saw the pole that would take her life, she was so terrified that her knees gave way, and she fell onto the floor, and had to be lifted to her feet by the guards who accompanied her. She was wearing a short decorated dress in her final hours. She was wincing and crying as she was lifted up onto the pole. She was secured by a leather strap around her waist which held her in position, and also further rope was added around her legs to secure her and keep them still so she could not wriggle as life slipped away. Her arms were also tied together to ensure she could not escape. The hangman made his final checks so she could not fall from the pole, and as she was lifted off the air, he secured the noose around her neck. The hangman then placed his gloved hands over her face, and the assistant released a drop, and Herta Kasparova, the collaborator with the Nazis, was executed. She continued to violently twitch and move her head side to side. Doctors then approached her body and confirmed that she had died from hanging, and her body was then placed into a coffin that had been brought. Inside of her coffin, someone had placed flowers before she was cut down, and then placed into the wooden box. She was then buried in the central cemetery, where she was buried with other Germans who died during and after the war. Her execution was attended by thousands of people from the surrounding towns, and there were even tickets sold to see her hang. The execution of Herta Kasparova was significant in Czechoslovakia, as it was one of the last public executions carried out inside the lands. She was a woman who actively collaborated with the Germans and the Nazis in her work, and despite being German-Czech, she definitely identified herself more as German. She was involved in the interrogations for a number of members of the Czech Resistance. However, because of her actions, many people from her lands were executed. Also, she informed on those members of the Czech Resistance who looted her house, and then these were killed because of her information. It is claimed that she did get revenge on those who had been cruel to her at school, which is shocking to consider. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.